Good morning, folks. As you've no doubt discovered, the stream subject has changed for this morning, and that is on me. Uh, really could not get uh, could not get things where I wanted them as far as the Marvel superheroes setup. Still trying to figure out the optimal setup for my camera and everything here. Anyways, so what I decided to do is change tack a bit, and we'll go ahead and just do sort of a general chatty stream and uh, about geeky stuff and nerd light things. Um, so yeah, I have a sack just waiting. So good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yes, how dare I change things?
Yes, John.
No,
What makes
I was storming all all night and into the morning. In that kind of storm that you can hear coming in waves, though the rain is just coming down so hard you can hear it approaching like a train, and then it'll pass. And so that plus the fact that I couldn't quite sort out some of the character generation things the way that I wanted to do them, I just figured it's easy enough to just push it off a week and just
Yeah, it's fair.
chatty old chat.
hmm
So, how's everybody doing? Both in chat and on screen here with me.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. It's been a hard week. Just eat, work, sleep, repeat kind of
Mm,
status I've entered into. So it's been looking forward to this weekend of just like unwinding. Just gonna do some last minute some additional prep work for next weekend when we play.
cool, cool. Yeah, real quick shout out to the folks who have shown up. I see that the geek is here. Hey, John and Sean, Mage's Musings, welcome. I'm sure there's a couple other folks lurking around, and they'll probably chime in. Um, for me, I have had a good amount of behind the scenes geek time this last week. Work is just work. I mean, my work is neither here nor there. It's a job. I've been doing it for 16 years, and um, the job has changed, but it doesn't take a lot out of me. Hey,
Mhm.
RW Bishop, welcome. Uh, so I've been working on Call of Cthulhu scenarios. Because it seems like when I have an idea for one, the fountain just opens full tap and it just starts pouring out, and I end up with a whole bunch that I have to then go back and try and work on. The chore becomes getting enough of each one down so I can come back to it and know what I was thinking and not lose it. So it's this mad dash of opening up new tabs and new folders in Google Drive. Um, got a couple of miniatures painted. Won't show them up here on the camera because I'd have to walk over and get them. But I got a barbarian painted, and I got an owl bear that I converted to a giant raven monster painted.
Mm.
Um, it's amazing what a bad sculpt, better than I can sculpt. But the owl bear sculpt doesn't look all that owlish, and so I added a little bit of static grass glued around the head and shoulders, and then spray painted that black. And that static grass looks kind of like the thin little feathers that a raven has around its head that often stick out, and
Mm.
it's pretty cool. It was a challenge trying to figure out a way to highlight an all black monster, so I went with sort of a moonlight highlight, so dry brush some blues and then yellows over the top.
Mm.
Um, Weather heist scenario idea. So it's funny you say this, but anything. In fact, I got to do a stream on this. Uh, the You can make a scenario for Call of Cthulhu out of anything. Um, I'm completely sold on that idea. Nothing is outside the realm I mean, this is true of horror in general. I mean, I would say it's probably true of storytelling in general. It just depends on how you feature it. But yeah, I mean, a weather heist is perfect fodder for a Call of Cthulhu scenario because so many Call of Cthulhu stories and scenarios feature people engaged in one activity who find themselves suddenly facing the supernatural.
Mhm.
I know for a fact that there is at least one and probably more published Call of Cthulhu scenarios that are set against the backdrop of a heist. I know Seth Skorkowski recently published one, I believe, that is that's tied into Innsmouth, and involves a bank heist. So, um, I mean, and then it could be something as simply, you're talking about rainy heist. Let's just run with John's idea here. Rainy heist. We could even tie it in. We could literally say, on a rainy night in the city of Innsmouth, there is a heist to try and steal some of that old Obed Marsh gold, that
Mhm.
creepy gold, from the town, and some locals from Boston figured out that this podunk town on the coast has a bunch of gold laying around, and they come to town to try and take that gold. Boom! There's your Call of Cthulhu scenario.
Easily. You can also have, the weather be a major, factor for if you are to be going in, like you said, a heist. The fact that you're going to be doing this because limited visibility, especially if it's a major storm, and the players have to go through all the legwork of preparing for the actual ambush itself, the setup for that. That's a lot of. At least I can imagine a lot of players will go very creative with that when they know that there's going to be heavy rain and it's a major factor. The roads are going to be slippery, the mud, there'll be
Oh,
mud.
especially if you're playing in the 20s or the 30s where the roads are not great to begin with.
Exactly. And even in like in if we go into like D&D, having an event or having players traveling through heavy rainfalls can also be quite the experience. Whether they're out in the plains where it's immediately limited visibility, but you've also got your feet sinking down. You're gonna have to find somewhere to be safe and, well, dry, or if you're gonna be in the rainforest, and that's another major factor, because then the rain's gonna be triggering other things, especially amongst the what's it called, the flora, the fungi, and everything else. That suddenly goes like, "Oh, it's time to come out," and then things can happen from there.
Yeah, I know that one scenario that I wrote and ran, the one that I'm always talking about, where I made salt scary,
Hmm.
um, starts with the train tracks getting washed out by a rainstorm, a New England rainstorm, and then the facilitating the players having to take an alternate route to get to their destination. And on that side trip, um, it's funny. I have had in my head, I'm not the guy to write this because while I can come up with great ideas, I'm not a professional level writer. I really think there's merit to a supplement for Call of Cthulhu that is nothing but small side jaunt scenarios that you can insert into the middle of other scenarios that involve travel.
Hmm.
I know there are some larger campaigns like Horror and the Orient Express and all of that have these little side jaunts. The Masks of Nyarlathotep have that as well. Has that as well. But I think a book of ready-made canned scenarios that all take place in a short span and can easily be plugged in. Hey, morning, Derek. My buddy Derek, who is Adric Storm here. Uh, all right, he's gone full Cobra Commander on us here. With his Weather Dominator. But although I have to laugh because the neighborhood that we all lived in back in the
Mhm.
day when we first started gaming together is known in Washington State. This whole area of Everett, Washington, is known for having just the absolute craziest weather. It's in this convergence zone,
Mhm.
and so one day I was driving down the highway and it was bone dry. And so to get to my house, I would then have to cut off the main highway, go through a residential neighborhood for a while, and then hook up with another highway that goes down to my place. It was just easier than going all the way down to where the two highways met. And, so I drove past, and I'm driving down this road, and out of the middle of nowhere, like bone dry, nothing, full on snow sticking to the ground for about 2 blocks, and then bone dry, nothing on the other end. And I'm like, who in the neighborhood has the weather control machine? I'm like, it's like it could be that crazy of weather. In Everett, it was just like, you often hear people talk about, oh, you don't like the weather, wait an hour. No, in Everett, it's like, you don't like the weather, wait till you blink. It was just crazy. But yeah, I mean, weather can be such a massively useful tool in games. I think it often gets ignored.
Yep.
I mean, I think for fantasy games, so many times we're spending time in a dungeon.
Yep.
And so the weather gets ignored. But a lot of dungeons are downhill and have open entrances. What happens when that storm picks up outside and suddenly that dungeon's got a flash flood going through it?
Oh yeah, definitely. You're also gonna have the whole thing of like the dungeons are rarely like within 6-7 hours of the city. You're gonna be having to travel, maybe 6 to 8 days into the far wilderness.
I have to get my other stream partner over here.
Oh yeah, of course.
She wants to be petted. This is Ophelia.
Nice. But yeah, no, like you're still going to be having like 6 to 8 days of traveling at the very least, and then that's a major thing that you're going to be looking into, because again, weather can have a huge impact. If it's very warm, you can be looking at, especially water will be drunk more often, and then that's going to be a resource you have to look after. You're then going to have the dampness, and make sure that doesn't set into your rations, because dampness can then spoil your rations, and now you're even in more trouble.
Yeah, and weather. I think weather is honestly a good shorthand for just the environment in general in games. Dungeons may not necessarily have weather, but they've got damp and they've got mold. They've got bad air. And you can play with that. Well, I'm going to say good morning to Jason. He made it here as well. Mechhead Studios. Let's see.
Because I mean, taking for example my second edition game, there was a period where the weather was a major factor, because the Yuan-Ti had basically brought the sun a bit closer to the world, causing a huge heat wave to come around, anywhere between 43 to 46 degrees Celsius. I'll get that in Fahrenheit.
That's okay. I generally know where that is.
Yeah, so 114, 115 Fahrenheit, which for me,
I know it translates to hot.
Yes. For me, as a simple Northern European, that is just death. I would not be able to survive that, but I know that is normal heat, areas that you might be finding in the Sub-Saharan and some of the, Saudi Arabian peninsula. But we were playing in the equivalent of what should have been southern France. And the players have been reminded that we're approaching the winter season, which means that it's going to go from, the regions of southern France all the way up to Norwegian cold. So they're bracing themselves for tundra or blizzard level coldness that's going to be attacking them. But that lends a lot to the players having to think long term, because some of the players are now going like, well, we need to buy winter blankets, we need to buy warmer clothes while we still can.
My wife and I always joke around about how we much rather have cold than heat, because you can always put more clothes on or do more to mitigate cold.
Yep.
But especially in polite society, you can only go so far to mitigate the effects of heat before not only do you pass into point of no return, because it can always usually get warmer than you can mitigate, but also there's the legalities of nudity. So real quick here, let me say good morning to Cal, and Yeah, Twilight Zone. I'm going to respond to RW Bishop here. Yeah, Twilight Zone episodes are great for scenario setups. Honestly, and maybe we'll change from weather now to scenario inspirations. I get a lot of inspirations especially for horror scenarios, from true crime.
Mhm.
True crime and mystery stuff. There's a lot of unsolved cases or mysterious cases out of there, or cases that are made out to be more mysterious than they really are. Let's admit it. A lot of them are like, and what happened to this guy? Shit happened, because shit happens. Yeah. But a lot of those are just perfect for filling in the blanks for scenarios. There's so much easy access to short fiction as well online, that you can mine short stories, old and new. You have the classics, M.R. James, H.P. Lovecraft, you know, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, Robert E. Howard. Got all those guys, but you have newer guys too. There's so many of them that they don't pop into my brain, but I listen to all these playlists for horror, and there's all these great little short stories here and there. So there's so much to work with, and a lot of times it's just blending it together, and you can see that so many of these old great horror stories are based on such a simple principle. I've mentioned before the H.P. Lovecraft story that he ghost wrote for and I cannot remember her name, but it's his story called The Mound.
Mhm.
And it is literally a whole story inspired by one of the mounds in the Midwest on the prairie, for the various mound societies that were there, and a Post-it note that he was handed. I mean, in fact, the wording for that he was given to write this whole story was, in the middle of, I can't remember what state, there is a mound. On that mound is a ghost. That's all she gave him to write the story. And he writes this gigantic story. I mean, it's the sort of thing that wouldn't play well as a scenario, but if he can come up with that out of a Post-it note in a very real world, interesting point. I won't say mystery, because the mounds aren't a mystery. People made them.
Yeah.
But so much of good horror or good scenarios, good storytelling, good dungeons, because that mound could easily be a place for a dungeon, right?
Yep.
Are simple things that are made weird. If you look at H.P. Lovecraft himself, I love the episode of Overly Sarcastic that they did a Halloween special on H.P. Lovecraft. Very humorous, very funny episode. But they basically talked about how all of his stories are just effectively him being afraid of things or being too dumb to understand things.
Mhm.
He's described by his contemporaries as not having a constitution not suitable for math. Basically, he was made ill by mathematics, which is why non-Euclidean geometry, which isn't a huge mystery. I mean, I'm not a math whiz myself, but to him that was like, things are non-Euclidean, they're weird, and like the year he writes Cold Air is the year that air conditioning is invented.
Mhm.
So he's got this whole horror story based around Cold Air. Now, whether that was him afraid of it or just inspired by it is, again, simple, mundane things. I mean, so much of his horror is just based on his absolute paranoia about, diluting bloodlines and inbreeding, and, his fear of fish.
Yeah.
You know? But the thing is that all of that is a good example of really mundane stuff just turned up to 11 into this nightmarish cosmos of of horror. Let's see, what do we got here? Lizard overlords. Well, keep in mind, this is also the period of time where any sort of health condition a woman might have would be diagnosed as hysteria, as overly sarcastic puts it, or also known as being a woman disease. So let's go. I mean, if you read anything biographical about H.P. Lovecraft, the man could have benefited very much from modern psychiatric medicine as well as
Yes.
modern medicine, considering he died at 43 from stomach cancer. But he, like a lot of crazed madmen, horrible people, or even good people with a lot of problems from history, just some nice mood stabilizers and some therapy could have gone a long way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wish I had got on top. I mean, I'm going to soapbox for a moment here, but it's just a general chat. I wish I would have got on top of my shit earlier in my life, because I found out way too late that I had a lot going on that could have been helped by just, an impartial person to talk to and a prescription.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Um,
I do understand, and I can
yeah,
definitely agree that yes,
yeah.
that's a major thing. But taking
I
it
mean,
back to
I know
role playing,
it's a general chat. I mean, honestly,
yeah,
but
fair enough.
um, but I was actually more responding to Mage's thing here. Yeah, made by ill by math. I mean, anything that causes you suitable anxiety can make you ill. So, and you can work that into your stories.
Easily.
Let's see. I'm not going to go too far down this rabbit hole, Mages, but I think it's easy to dismiss that. But I think a lot of things are actually deeper seated than we like to think they are, and even a minor problem can certainly be addressed by acknowledging it and doing something about it. But not doing anything about it is certainly not going to do anything for it. So, anyhow, before the number of folks watching dives, like a 1930s submarine going to look for horrible sunken temples under the ocean, an actual Lovecraft story, but it was a World War I submarine. But read The Temple. That is a weird one. If you've never read The Temple or listened to The Temple, this is a nice thing. We live in the age of audiobooks too, so I find that a lot of Lovecraft and his contemporaries, when I say Lovecraftian, I'm not just talking about Lovecraft. Any of Lovecraftian horror, I find a lot of times is a lot easier to listen to than it is to trudge through their prose trying to read it. There's a certain poetry to the way that they write that is so much nicer to listen to than to try and wrap your modern brain around when you're reading it. It's not that you're dumb or that it's hard to understand. It's just not the way we think or talk or or convey ideas nowadays. And I think that's one of the reasons that so much of their stuff seems so horrible and evil, and because if you really think about it, in a lot of ways, those older authors were at the same time really creative, but also super lazy. Because they never they spend so much time not describing something and yet making it end up absolutely horrible. I will say that like in the old fiction, so little of it is actually scary. It's just unnerving and eerie. I mean, I don't think I've ever been frightened by a Lovecraft or Lovecraftian story, but they've definitely made me go kind of, that's kind of
I think that's also what he's trying to go for. He's trying to evoke something, not the immediate sense of terror, but it's the discomfort. Because that's often what I've found when I've read things like, Dagon or The Call of Cthulhu. It's the discomfort of what he's suggesting. But in my head, like I also start finding the patterns, like in the Call of Cthulhu, and the whole pattern of like you've been exposed to something that is otherworldly. Now random events in your life is suddenly starting to happen, and people are just mysteriously dying off by what it looks to be very normal circumstances once you start adding it up. But once you add in the factor of what they've now learned, things doesn't align. And in my head, it's just like this is terrifying, mainly because it takes away the concept of freedom. And
yeah, I think a lot of it is your you're not feeling the terror, you're experiencing the terror of others and
Mm.
having it described to you. Like, in Dunwich Horror, the guy looks at the monster as it's revealed through a spyglass and freaks the fuck out. He just like loses it. He starts babbling and drops the spyglass, and he's not even anywhere near it. He's looking at this creature from across the valley,
Mm.
and he just loses it. And but yet you're not feeling but your brain goes, oh damn, how horrible was that thing?
Mm.
Um, my cat is looking for me, even though she knows exactly where I am, and I haven't moved. But but yeah, so I mean, you can take that I think is the key also. Like, when going back to making scenarios, I guess this is going to be the making scenarios stream anyways, because that's what we ended up on. That's the nice thing about these open streams. You just kind of don't have an idea, and then an idea comes out of the ether. Finding a thing that you want to write about, and when I say write, I mean put down a scenario, put down the work for that you can then turn weird. I have in my head a protagonist for a series of short stories. Unfortunately, I'm not a foodie enough to write this, but I had this funny idea of a semi-humorous but also horrible series of short stories of weird fiction, where a food critic keeps running into food-related in his day-to-day, reviewing restaurants and trying out new foods and stuff, keeps running into the paranormal. And so, like, but when I first that came out of an idea where I mispronounced Amun Ra, right, or misheard somebody pronounce Amun Ra, the mummy name, right, or the god name, and it sounded like they said Ramen Ra, and I'm like, what a great name for a ramen restaurant. And then my brain, I'm like, I can just see it, like, a neon chibi mummy cartoon character, a lot of like really, flashy stuff. And then like my brain's like, but what if it was horrible? I mean, it started out with like, what a great idea for an actual ramen restaurant. I'm like, but what if there's actually some sort of ancient mummy at the heart of this chain of ramen restaurants that starts popping up and has a slavish devotion to the soup that they're serving, and then next thing you know, I've got this character developing in my head. So again, you could take the most mundane thing, a ramen restaurant, and turn it horrible, and you just have to like find the weird.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. I mean, it's like, find the weird. May just points out, Attack the Killer Tomatoes, Cthulhu style. You almost have a setup for that with, I mean, honestly, Attack the Killer Tomatoes, Cthulhu style, is kind of an Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because you have a weird plant that does horrible things. But imagine you take the setup for The Color Out of Space, an actual Lovecraft tale that produces large, overly abundant seeming but foul fruits, but now have those fruits leave their stalks and start chasing people across the countryside. There you go. Call of Cthulhu meets Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I would say Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, if you were to get rid of the horror in that, or get rid of the humor in that, and really double down on the horror, as obscure as it is, you could still come up with something truly creepy and weird. It'd still be funny. I don't think you could have Killer Tomatoes and not have it be humorous. Kind of like Gremlins, right? Gremlins is kind of creepy and scary, but it's a comedy horror, but not as goofy and slapstick, say, as Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is just schlock, and it's supposed to be. Gremlins plays itself straight and has a creepy element to it. I mean, there is an element of cosmic horror in a lot of ways to Gremlins, if I dare say, because nobody really knows where these Mogwai came from. They have this weird sort of lore to them. They've got these odd rules that defy logic. Like, don't get it wet, don't feed it after midnight. Well, when does after midnight end? These kind of unspeakable. You got some creepy old dude in a junk shop in Chinatown. I mean, everything about Gremlins is just pointing towards, some sort of horrible cosmic horror, and it does go there. I mean, when they like multiply in the masses, I mean, it's got humor peppered throughout it, but again, you know, it's where do you insert the weird?
Hmm.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is true. The second Gremlins absolutely doubles down on the silly, and that's why it is inferior. Um, well, this is true. I mean, maybe Nyarlathotep is a foodie. You don't know. Um, yeah, cute and funny to the biting off your legs, and then of course you have things like Critters, which is like the Gremlins' ugly cousin, or was it the other one, not Night of the Creeps, which is the other one, the one with the stupid little boggling looking creatures. I can't remember. So many crappy movies of the 80s. My brain is a jumble. But yeah, I mean, so that's the weird scenario thing. I mean, really just honestly pick something and just figure out what to do to make it weird. And
Make it unique.
yeah, and a lot of times the weird just builds naturally. Uh, no, it's not Critters. Critters is the one with the Krites that had a bunch of sequels. There was another one that had the little monsters that reminded me of the Boglin puppets from the 80s. Yeah, I know the Gremlins, Secrets of the Mogwai kind of gets into the origins, and also the novelization, I think, dipped a toe in that, and I believe there's even a sequel or prequel novel to Gremlins, like they did back in the day. Back before we had direct to video and the interwebs, people wrote books uh, about things. I was actually interested. Speaking of which, I was watching a blurb the other day, and they're talking about how before VHS, the novelization of a movie was really our way to have a home entertainment enjoyment of a movie. Your favorite movie came out, and then you picked up the novelization of it. So anytime you wanted to, you could sit down and kind of rewatch, relive the movie. It's an interesting analogy that never clicked for me. I never thought about it that way, but it really is. Yes, Jason, that's it. Ghoulies, that's the one I'm thinking about. And also Derek. What's a buck?
What's a book?
Oh, a book. I'm like, sorry, but yeah, it was an interesting analogy that I never actually really considered, but absolutely, the novelization of a movie is the precursor to the VHS. It's the home entertainment option for your favorite movie. The cool thing, that the reason that I always used to snatch up novelizations when I could, is they're usually based on earlier screenplays of the movie, and so a lot of times they will have scenes that didn't make it into the movie, or even scenes that not only didn't escape, that got cut, but where things are actually different. Like if you ever pick up the novelization of Predator, the Predator in the book is the Predator they were originally going to go with for the movie, but they changed because it was decided that it was stupid. If you pick up the book for Terminator 2 Judgment Day, there's an entire opening scene, this big, long, drawn out scene that takes place during the Future War part, that is just really cool. And it shows like much more about the Skynet war machine and all of that. It's just, and the Empire Strikes Back novelization still includes the part where the rebels have been capturing the Wampas and have them locked up, and C-3PO tears off the warning tag from a door, so stormtroopers go in there and get attacked by snow monsters, you know, um, which got filmed evidently, but was cut because it kind of messed up the pacing of the show, but of the movie. But that, and it was also in I think the BBC radio play has that scene in it still. Yeah, and it's funny is that the stuff from the Terminator novelization made it into the arcade shooter game, which was all in the Judgment Day Future War scene. So But yeah, it's good stuff out there. No, the creature in the book was dumb. If we're in the original Predator, he didn't turn invisible; he shapeshifted, and shapeshifted to an insanely stupid degree. Like at one point, he turns invisible by basically becoming a virus. It's ridiculous. But there is a scene in the book that didn't make it into the movie that would have been cool. They probably didn't put it in there in the movie because it would have tipped the hat as to the creature a little too early in the movie. But the book opens up on the Predator ship with him waking up from hypersleep or whatever they do when they're going interplanetary and getting up and examining the Earth and trying to basically determining what his target is. Yes, I do know this. He was intended to play the Predator in the movie, and he hated the design. He thought it was stupid, and that was actually from a lot of his early complaints and how like dumb the costume was that they changed it. So, yeah, there's also this. He was passing out in the costume because the costume was like a big bug with pincer hands. I think there's an homage to the original Predator design in the Predators movie with one of the other aliens that they run into on the planet. But I can't be certain. I think it was like the design they went with was sort of loosely based on their original Predator design. I think Dark Horse Comics is doing what they've been doing with a lot of titles, and they're going to do a version of the Predator that's based on the original screenplay, like they did with Star Wars. They did the Star War, which is based on Lucas's original treatment. Like they did also the original. They did a comic book version of William Gibson's version of Alien 3 also. So. Yeah, it's they call him like the River Leaper, River something like that is the name of the monster in the credits. But yeah, it's the one that's running away from the Predators is the one that's based after the original design. So we've gone far afield, but hey, this is a general chat. This is not the here to stay on topic. This is kind of an anti-Saxist kind of
Really,
a
that's why
stream.
I'm quiet.
You have thoughts. You have ideas. I know there's a random element to your brain. Let's hear it. Roll a d4 and pick one. I want to shut up so Saxis can talk.
I really have nothing.
I'm going to sit here. No, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drink my coffee.
That's fine. I have nothing.
Everybody, let's get on Saxis's butt to talk.
I literally have nothing to contribute. That's the thing, though, because I didn't watch the Predator. I didn't watch the Aliens. I have
about it. What movies do you watch?
I don't really
watch a lot of movies.
No, like I don't watch a lot of movies. Full stop.
Fair.
That's the thing. Like I do like things that are historically inspired movies. The occasional cheesy fantasy ones. Kingdom of Heaven is a very big one for me. Of course, Lord of the Rings. That's like it's neither here nor there really.
No, I mean it's just kind of curious. I watch a lot of stuff. I am of the TV generation, so it's every time I get out, they drag me back in with something. I mean, and it's interesting because to kind of bring it back, scenario wise, there are shows that are not fantasy related or not horror related or not science fiction related where you can still get great scenarios from. I've been watching, Jen and I have been watching the Yellowstone series, which is surprisingly good, although I had to curse it because effectively Yellowstone tricked me into watching like a Dynasty style type of series, except for it's a modern one, so it's actually written well and not as cheesy and schlocky. But in there are a lot of episodes that have given me good ideas for NPCs, for minor plot elements, for it's all about a giant ranch in Montana, but there's a lot there that I can pull from for characters and even bits of dialogue. I mean, just that's the other thing. I mean, watching shows and reading books and stuff is a great source for just NPCs. Uh,
I hear you. Yeah, that's like I said, I don't really have a lot to contribute on that.
no, it's all good.
But see, yeah, I don't watch enough to actually start stealing from things. I usually steal from the previous ones I've seen. Well, when I watched Battlestar Galactica, that was when I was meant to be getting into playing Rogue Trader, and that just made my head sort of go in that direction. But then I learned about the whole how to incorporate spreadsheets into that. Big shock, and then that's sort of, went into its own direction.
Well, it's funny on the topic of reskinning stuff or getting inspiration. The Battlestar Galactica board game, for example, for the new show, has been transformed into a Lovecraftian board game that takes place on a ocean liner. They've taken the core mechanics for the Battlestar Galactica game, where there's a traitor in your midst and you're being assaulted from all sides by an enemy, and then you have to move around the ship to get things done. They've taken that,
Yep,
and now you have people on an ocean liner who are being assaulted by Dagon and a bunch of deep ones, and there's that creepy, insidious, Lovecraftian mindfuck going on, and there's a traitor in your midst, but it's effectively a rewrite of that Battlestar Galactica game. It's a good example of how you could watch a show and be inspired to do another thing. I mean, it's not the same thing, but I mean, if you were to sit there and say, watch Yellowstone like I have been, and change that to a horror game, what sort of terrors and stuff happen when a bunch of ranchers start finding their cattle dead, and then run from there. I mean, in the show it might be wolves or a bear, which is still scary, but in the game that you're going to run, maybe it's something horrible.
no, it easily can be. Yeah, I mean, there's like you said, you could take something that is rather mundane and normal, but you can twist it around. Like you said, even if you took something like Call of Cthulhu, 1920s, and you'd have to be looking after, a farm or anything like that, you can have a number of different horrors that could just be plaguing on, the cattle, the animals, the people, and from there you then have to, have the players, all deal with what that is.
Yeah, there's just, I guess when I hear folks talk about how it's hard to come up with scenarios, I guess I acknowledge that there's a certain amount of experience that plays into that, and like if you've been doing it for a while, obviously it's easier. But I have a feeling that the base assumption for people when it comes to making scenarios for whatever game is that it has to be some complete idea, or that it has to be some profoundly different or interesting thing. That's the other thing. Rinse and repeat. Um, going back to Call of Cthulhu drink. Uh, how many published scenarios are there by Chaosium? We won't even go into like the Miskatonic repository, which is their version of the DM's Guild. How many scenarios do they have written about a creepy old house? They have a whole ass supplement that's a compilation of those called Mansions of Madness. That one basic premise has been used over and over and over, and continues to get used over and over. It was continually used over and over in the source material that it's all based on. So if that idea can be rehashed ad infinitum, you really and be taken seriously, then if you're creating for folks creating your own scenarios, don't worry about your scenario idea not being the bestest, newest thing. You're not trying to invent sliced bread here. You're trying to make a fun scenario to play through.
Yeah.
The one I ran for John and crew the other week, not the most original setup. I mean, it could effectively. I mean, the base setup is nothing we haven't seen in a Stephen King or even a cheesy sci-fi channel horror movie, but it was still fun for them to play. And it was
Mhm.
still fun for me to run, and it was still worth our time.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, usually when I have to start making scenarios, I don't go for what is. I mean, I advocate for you to know the start, middle, and the end, but that's if you start looking into like the grand scheme of things, of like the big campaign. I really wouldn't advocate for that. I would really recommend start with what is session one or session two, and then start there. Like, what's the first thing? What's the hook? And then from there, you build it up as things go along.
yeah,
And more often than not, you will find that the players will flesh out the world for you because they will say ideas, they will ask questions, or they will say things that you just aren't picking up on. And more often than not, I mean, I've found that sometimes it's even worth turning around and going like, well, you're asking a question about the law or in regards for elves. Here's what we've established so far. What's your take on this? Or what, like, throw some of it back onto the players because they can contribute to the world as well. I mean, that was one of the things that I know. Well, when we had started our fifth edition game, the big thing that we did was we sat down and we said, right, what is the fort going to be like? Who are the NPCs? What's the environment like? What are we going to be dealing with?
yeah,
And then that was an investment from all the players because now this is the bed that they will be sleeping in. Everyone has got a stake for what's going on.
yeah. And in that campaign, I mean, I feel a little bit guilty sometimes. I feel like I sort of steamrolled the creative lead on that. But whatever, I won't cry about it.
But
Like,
there is some
because it
time,
ends up being very much what I wanted to play, and I'm like,
yeah.
I hope I
But
didn't press my
ev-
ideas too far into it.
but at the very same time, every single person was preemptively told, well, here's the idea of what we're going to be doing. So whether it was going to be the frontier or in the Canadian environment, or whether it was going to be the frontier in West Africa or the Middle East or whatever, the steppes, we all knew that we were going to be going in for a survival one. The aesthetic is where most people went, well, we know what this is going to be like, so it's not too alien for the majority of the
Yeah,
players. So I know that they all jumped in on that, so that wasn't a problem. I think most people were thinking this was good. We now have a sense of direction. We know what we can relate this to, and then that worked out. But again, that was a team effort.
yeah.
And then this,
Fortunately, my preference seems to have lined up with the group, but I have to be honest. Early on, I was like, I feel like I'm taking over and making this the game I want to play, but evidently it was what other. And Mage's comment here is a good one about the Beyond the Supernatural game. Like whether or not you like Palladium's games or not, um, they have a lot of good writing in them because they are nothing but giant books full of walls of text. Um, but this bit from Beyond the Supernatural, dog behind a fence barking, suddenly jump scare, easily moved on from same dog glowing red eyes, creepy, same dog glowing red eyes, open gates, scary. It's a really good example. I remember in my sci-fi lit class when I was in high school, they're talking about horror in there and why Alien was creepy, and they're talking about like the idea of what you build up in your brain is usually much scarier than what shows up on the screen, and how some of the release of the horror is realizing when the monster finally shows up is that it's not as bad as you thought it was, but it's still bad. And that kind of feeds in here too. Like, I think that's sort of where Lovecraft and his contemporaries, as much as I joke around about how they were lazy writers, I think that their writing style really lends into letting your brain fill in the blanks, because everything for them is unspeakable and unhorrible, undescribable and unformed and masses of blah, and everything is just so generally described that your brain just fills in the blanks. I was reading, not reading, I was listening to a story called The Invaders. Um, and it's this guy at one point, the guy and his friend are sitting in a restaurant or something, or on a patio in a restaurant, and um they describe how there's a plant vine kind of
Mhm.
draped over the side of the building, and how he kind of casually leans, and it didn't look quite right. So he reaches over, and he's describing how the vine, the tendril, doesn't look normal, right? And you're already like, ew, okay, what is it? And so he reaches over and he touches it, and then things go from bad to worse, because then he touches it, and then the tentacle starts, the tendril, the plant vine starts to pull away from his hand and pull up the building.
Mm.
And then they realize that there's a monster on the side of the building, and it's like, so like that progression of is again kind of going back to that dog and gate thing. It's like, a plant growing on the side of the building where it shouldn't be, maybe a little bit weird. A plant growing on the side of the building that is way too big around, too thick to be like your typical creeper at you'd expect in an urban environment. It's getting a little bit odd. Now that it's slipping through my fingers of its own volition, now we're into really scary territory.
I am gonna have to call it now because
Okay.
I'm gonna have to go and make dinner. But it was a
Yeah.
good chat.
Hey, Letterman, thanks for coming on. All right, so it's just me again. I got the big window now. All right, let's see. Well, I mean, to be fair, in a lot of ways, a blatant upfront attack is in a lot of ways less scary than the things that we might imagine that it could have been. So yes, monster attacks rips face to shreds. That's very visceral, and but that's understandable. It is sort of a believable outcome to a monster encounter, but until the monster does that, you don't know what it's going to do. Until you open the door, you are up. The possibilities are endless. What the monster's going to do, you don't know, and your brain could fill in a lot more weird things. I mean, maybe it's going to grab you, carry it off its lair, and implant you with its young, or maybe it's going to inhabit your body and use you to mess up the people that you love the most. Who knows? We don't know. I don't know. That sounds like a YouTube account problem. I'm not monetized. So, and so any ads would just be normal YouTubery. Let's see. Oh, actually, yeah. So, I had a moment where I lost my train of thought. All right. So, a good example of things going from creepy to worse. Just listened to a story called "The Men of Porlock," and in the end of it, spoilers for, actually, you know what? I'm not going to go into it. I want people to listen to this. It's a great story. I had never heard it, never heard of it, never heard of the author. The reason I listened to it is that Porlock sounds awfully close to Portlock, which is an actual Pacific Northwest mystery town that supposedly has a history of being assaulted by anything from Bigfoot to demons to witches. So I thought this might be a story where they mistranslated or intentionally changed the name by one letter, and but it was really good. Anyways, that depends on what you're into, my friend. Yes, listen to the Men of Porlock, or the Men from Porlock. In fact, let me pull it up here real quick because I liked it enough. It's the Men from Porlock, Geek. The well, the story takes place in America, in the Pacific Northwest. But like many American towns, it is likely borrowing its name from a place in the old world. I mean, we have at least 2 Portlands. I think we have more than 2 Portlands in America. Um, uh, yeah, it's from everything I can tell, the story, The Men from Porlock, is loosely based around, at least tangentially associated with Portlock, which is an Alaskan town. It's a fishery that literally hangs on the edge of an island into the sea, and kept having bodies show up mangled. And at one point had an entire piece of logging machinery. This is not an old world American mystery horror story thing. This is a real place. In the 20s and like the early turn of the century, they had a whole piece of logging equipment that was just like overturned and chucked, evidently. If you can believe them. I mean, take from it what you want. The bravest man in the world, however, is the post office worker, the postman for that town, who even after the rest of the town left, believing, at least to some degree, that they were being attacked by monsters from the woods and witches and demons and curses and all of that, stayed by himself in Portlock for a year with the expectation that once people came to their senses and got over their initial fear, they would come back. That man has the most giant brass balls known to man. You would not catch me hanging out for a year in a supposedly Bigfoot assaulted town on the edge of the Alaskan sea. Yeah, it's funny. Again, I'm pretty sure that we're looking at just a transposition of names from the old world to the new. You know, very there. I mean, there are clearly, there's patterns. You got York, New York, things like that. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, we're kind of at the hour here, sort of, and I had nothing planned for today because, well, I had something planned, but that didn't pan out. Can definitely field questions, or if somebody else wants to come on with me, we can chat some. I do have the invite link up at the top of the comments there. So if you wanted to come in, you can. I don't have, I mean, I can ramble on. We all know that. If you know me at all by now, I am never without words. But I guess I can talk some more on scenarios from nothing. Anything around you at any time is a source for, at least in the context of horror. There's a mage from nothing. Hey, how's it going, man?
Hello.
No, you certainly are welcome to come on, but I wasn't like telling you had to. But so what's up?
Not too much. I'm editing a video and decided to play hooky and come in and chat.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I know you tend to be more on the fantasy RPG guy, right?
Yes, I mean, I used to play Heroes Unlimited and Marvel Superheroes and
Yeah.
Beyond the Supernatural. Those were, Rift, all that. I eventually just sort of retired from non-fantasy and stuck with D&D.
Yeah.
I'll play in games, but I won't run them anymore, modern ones. But
I'm glad you do, because you did really well in the Call of Cthulhu game. That was fun.
Yeah, I have personal troubles and issues with running modern games, and so that's why fantasy is my safe space, as it were.
Yeah, I have trouble running modern, as in like current, up to date, to the date scenarios.
Contemporary,
yeah, contemporary scenarios. I can run 20th century scenarios at earlier time frames, but the modern world really poses some interesting hangups that I'm not yet all that adept at avoiding without seeming cheesy. Like, how many times do you tell the players that their cell phones don't work?
Yeah.
No, there are. I mean, and as the funny thing is like in the early days of cell phones, it was easy to explain that the characters in a story are out of range of the cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or might not have had one, or
but nowadays, how realistic is it that you're actually out of cell coverage?
Yeah.
I mean, even in some of the most remote parts of the country, you can still get cell coverage nowadays. I mean, there are still dead spots, but it's getting increasingly difficult. And if you go to other countries, it's near impossible because there's some countries that have just skipped conventional telecommunications and just started dropping cell towers on the tops of mountains in the middle of the jungle. You know, because it's actually cheaper to build a tower, carry it by a crane to the top of a hill than to run line through 100 miles of jungle.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one issue. I mean, I that wouldn't concern me. I guess I'd just figure out how to work around it. But I think for me, the biggest hiccup with contemporary settings is simple knowledge. We're such a knowledgeable society, and it's easy. I mean, we know one person can know everything, and if I'm playing a game, if I'm running a game, I'm going to have such a breadth of knowledge. You want to dip your toe into legal concerns because you will need to know legal procedures, things like that, because you can easily pull somebody out of the scenario if that verisimilitude isn't there.
Yeah, I think you mentioned once having a lawyer player or something like that, or maybe
that was an example. That was
Yeah.
not a
Oh, okay.
real. That was a theoretical example. But yeah, it's like, okay, so if you're the DM, you're running a legal, or not a legal scenario, but laws will come up for sure. You know.
Yeah.
And you got a real lawyer on the table, and they're like, well, no, that's not how the law works. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, I think it's important when you're running scenarios in the modern setting to just assume a certain level of Hollywood verisimilitude as opposed to actual verisimilitude. You know,
I think you're right, and I think there's a lot of people that do it. And this is where it comes into me personally. So this is not something I necessarily would be able to handle. I'd probably be too concerned, too focused on getting that right, that other aspects would suffer.
I feel the same way when I'm running like military scenarios where there's actual soldiers in my game.
Right. And if you don't know military protocol, it can pump people out of it. And how many gamers do we know just through these the YouTube circuits who did military time, right?
If he doesn't mind me mentioning, I mean, Mechhead Studios, Jason, I mean, he's a Marine.
Right. You'll talk about, Legion of Myth. He talks about his Air Force service or whatever. My player in my Night Below campaign was a reservist. So it's,
There was a time in my gaming career that I was surrounded by so many active and former military people, and I had picked up so much, and I was very much interested in military stuff, and I still remain, that I would get people asking me if I was in the military. I'm like, no, just no stuff. I pick up slang because there's certain like key slang and stuff from periods of time that you would pick up from, your uncle's or your friend's dad, or your friend whose dad was a vet or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the more of that you accumulate, and then of course, being a Gen Xer, how many of my friends went into the military? How many of people in my generation went into the military? There's a joke that Gen Xers either went to military, went to rehab, or went to jail.
Right.
And so, I mean, the local game store that I used to hang out for a while in my mid 20s, the guys who owned it was a former Army and a former Marine, and then like their circle of friends were also former military. So I mean, yeah, playing games with those guys, I mean, they were cool. I have to give them credit because they never once made me feel like, God, what an idiot, he doesn't know what this is. I mean, they might throw out an acronym or something, but and then I'd be like, what is that? Or
what is that? Yeah.
Joke. But yeah, that's always I think that's always the thing. I think you can run into that with fantasy too. I mean, how many times have you ever run into actually, that's not how castles were made.
I have a stock answer for anything that defies modern or our reality, and
fantasy.
well, sort of. I would say, like, sort of example, studded leather armor never existed. And it's like, on Earth, maybe, but this isn't Earth. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And it's the same. Castles aren't made that way. On Earth, maybe, but the engineering in this world is different. So this is how it was
if
made.
you really want to get down to it, castles in D&D make no sense anyways because you have dragons. Why aren't all the walls covered in roofs?
Yeah. Well, dragons aren't the only threat out there. So
yeah. Well, there was actually, it's funny. There was a total tangent, but there was an actual really solid Dragon Magazine article on the whole topic of portraying strongholds in fantasy that were consistent for the world they lived in. They existed in. Like, okay, how do you defend, because there's such a prevalence of flying creatures, even if we're not talking about dragons, what about your neighboring kingdom with their griffin cavalry?
Ballista. A row of ballista.
Well, yeah. Well, they're talking about like, ballistas on towers is a thing. You're going to see it because ballistas on towers is kind of pointless in medieval works. In fact, ballistas themselves kind of went by the wayside by the time the Middle Ages came around. But they're definitely ballistas on a swivel is a great way to fight something that's flying, but also just simple like covered parapets, so they can't swoop down and grab you. I mean, look at the Lord of the Rings movie and how the freaking Nazgul are flying down on their fell beasts and just snatching guys off the walls of Minas Tirith. It's like,
and you
clearly
think Minas Tirith would know how to fight the Nazgul because we're aware of them.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like they're. I mean, even as lower fantasy as it is, the world of Middle Earth and the history of Minas Tirith coexist with horrible things like dragons and trolls. That's the other thing. How thick are your walls going to be? How tall are your walls now going to have to be in a world that has giants? A simple oak gate, even with iron bracing, may not be up to the task. But no,
it's got to be large enough to allow your horses and carriages through, but small enough that a giant would have trouble just kind of, just running through without bashing in their head or.
Yeah, it's the big argument that I always want to use too with people is like, look, we really don't want to go down the reality rabbit hole when it comes to fantasy, because if we're really going to start getting tied up in what's scientifically accurate or real, your dragon doesn't fly, your giant crumples under the weight of its own body. It just doesn't work. That, and if you really want to get down to it, your whole entire armor system is not realistic in D&D. I mean, plate mail isn't the cumbersome thing that they want you to believe it is in the stats. I mean, we all know by now that plate mail, well-made plate mail, was absolutely perfectly mobile.
Right. On Earth. But in this world,
I know, but we don't even have to get into the in this world argument. A lot of times, it's just like it's seriously just don't. You don't want to go down that, because at a certain point, it all unravels. Because like, okay, cool, you want the dragons to behave realistically. Okay, they're just dinosaurs now. Your magic suddenly stops working. Or if it does work, we're gonna have
unless it was alchemic based sleight of hand.
Well, and even if we're gonna establish a hard set of rules, D&D magic really doesn't adhere to a hard set of rules other than the Vancian magic framework. There's no like solid set of parameters that all spells have to work under, so it's not very scientific. It's like, lightning gets to work certain ways. Like, where did the idea that electricity, like a lightning bolt, bounces off of stone come from?
Right.
That's not scientific. Even though at the same time, you look at that first edition set of rules for the Fireball, and it's a mini dissertation on physics. It's like on thermodynamics. It'll fill this kind of volume and it'll continue down halls. I mean, Fireball was treated very realistically, and then you have lightning.
But lightning was an effect of the spell. It's specific. Like druid lightning is real lightning. It doesn't. It comes down from the sky during a cloudy situation. It doesn't bounce.
Yeah, the call lightning spell.
The call lightning, whereas the lightning bolt is specifically manipulated to have that effect. That's the magic.
I always like chain lightning.
None of my guys ever get high enough to be able to cast it. I'm too
Yeah.
brutal as a DM, I suppose.
Well, and if you really want to get into it, I mean, honestly, like, how realistically do you handle your lightning spell? Does a guy hit by a lightning bolt who's touching his friend, who's carrying his friend, also then transfer electricity to the other guy, or can you ground yourself?
I'm gonna say yes, he does, only because if he's that close proximity, he's probably in the area of the effect of the spell anyway.
That's true, but I'm just saying, there's always going to come up those instances, and that's of course why the DM is an adjudicator and there to make those decisions, because it's not all, the rules are there as the baseline. They're not going to be able to cover every instance.
Everything, yeah.
Especially players who are going to push and bend and twist everything to their.
I generally do allow lightning or electric attacks to continue on if there's a conductor, like if somebody's standing in water and other people are in that same water, then yeah, zap, everybody gets nailed.
Yeah, I would make that call too. If there were the Gauntlet. John, have you done a review or anything of this one? I'm not familiar with the module.
It's one of the UK. It's one of the UK ones. I think he did. I remember a discussion on the Gauntlet, and I think it was with John.
Tabletop tap room. I didn't ask her how large the room was. I said I cast
fireball. Yeah. Somebody one of the other YouTube channels talking fifth ed was asking how to make things more challenging. Fireball is kind of weak, and I'm like, well, play it the old school way. I put this in the comments. Play it the old school way. Have it expand to fill the space. Watch your players' faces as the fireball comes back at them, because it was a contained space. And somebody got mad at me. It's like, that's not fair. You're a horrible DM. The players would be right to leave your game if you did that. Somebody asked how to make it more challenging.
They would be right to leave. I'm not gonna go in an old school versus new school rant, but I just call me weird, but adversity is fun for me. Maybe it comes from that, and it's funny as, a lot of times, older gamers want to blame it on video games. I come from the generation that had video games showing up, and I will say this: nothing gets you to start plugging quarters into a machine like dying all the time.
Especially when you're on the cusp of a victory.
Exactly. It's like, dude, I almost had it, and we've all sat there at our computers and gone back to the previous save. I mean, we've all done that. Like, man, I refuse to accept that outcome. I'm going to go back to my save, and so, I mean, of course, with the save, I mean, it's an imperfect analogy because, of course, you're going back to the same character, but at the same time, whether it's the old school video games, the roguelikes and stuff like that, where, you had to start from scratch again. There's something fun about going through and taking another stab at it, even with a different character. I mean, there's nothing in the rules saying that you can't make your next character be Bob number 2. I mean, assuming you rolled him to be that way, but I mean, I think that many DMs out there would probably not bat an eye at you saying, "Can I just bring the same character back?" I mean, what's more important, that you play or that they make an original character, right?
That you understand the consequence of death. Make your damn new character. Yeah.
But let's see. Yeah, you may have beat Dragon's Lair, but how much did you pump into that game?
Not a penny. I'll tell you why.
Because you played it on your computer.
No. It was a stand-up arcade machine. My father at one point had a chalet up north, and he had bought a couple of arcade machines. He got them dirt cheap. I think it was like a police auction or something stupid like that. So he had a bunch, and one of them was Dragon's Lair, and so I got to play it for free. So I got really good at it.
I remember at a grade school skate party, um, the Wizard of War machine, which is one of the first like real-time head-to-head games, that was out there where, you could have your two wizards fighting each other on the screen at the same time. It was broken to where all you had to do is tap the 1-player, 2-player buttons over and over, and it would give you a 2-player game. And so my buddy and I sat there and played that game the entire. We didn't skate once. Usually we didn't skate anyway. Skate parties for us were more about getting bad pizza at the bowling alley / skate rink, and a giant soda, with all of the flavors in it, and just sitting there and talking D&D. But we sat there and played Wizard of War all night. My favorite video game, talking about plunging quarters in, was Gauntlet when I was in high school.
Yes.
Walking across they built a school across the street from a mall when I went to high school. The big Alderwood Mall, giant mall in Washington, right across the street from high school. Yeah, it was across a highway, but it doesn't matter. We were perfectly willing to play Frogger to get to the mall. There was a crosswalk, but we went over there on lunch one day, and when Gauntlet was big, and started playing. There's a guy already there playing, this adult man who is playing, and we're in high school, and we're like, hey, can we join? Because it's a 4-player, right? And we had 3 of us, and there was one of him. It's like, man, a chance to get a full Gauntlet.
Right? Didn't he keep feeding you? Giving
yeah,
you,
you've heard. So I told the story. Yeah,
he told the story. Yeah.
Yeah, he kept feeding us quarters. It was beautiful. It was like, this guy's the coolest adult in the universe. But no, I mean, just again, dying over and over and over, and still wanting to keep playing is, I guess, the point, the takeaway there, right? It sounds like in John's OSE games, people are just dying left and right, but they're coming back, right?
I think it was Gene who has been through 6 characters or something like that. John, if you're still listening, you can confirm. But there's a few people have died.
I know in your games you've had plenty of characters who have passed, at least in your OSE game.
Yeah, character graveyard. Although it's slowing down, they're getting the message. They're learning. It's like, we can talk. We can, we can do other things.
It also sounds like they cycle their characters sometimes. Like they have more than one character that they're working on at a time, which I think is a great way to play. Also, I think one of the big takeaways that I've and again, I'm skirting this line. I don't want to I'm trying not to be derogatory when talking about newer gamers as much as just a difference in experience, observational rather than confrontational. I think there's a loss of the perception of tabletop games in general, but RPGs as games. That they are a game to be played for the sake of the game as much as they are a role-playing game for the sake of role-playing the character. The game element seems to be taking a massive back seat, and the loss of that perspective and acceptance of it being a game, I think, is what colors a lot of the perceptions of, I don't want my character to die. My character should never die. Got to make the game easier to keep the characters alive, because they're forgetting that it's a game.
Mm-hmm.
You look at those early days of D&D, and sure, games evolved and changed, and I'm not going to say that the first version of D&D was like the perfect D&D. No, it wasn't. It was
a work in progress.
Yeah. It was very much expected that you would go in and play until you died, and then you would make a new character. You basically drop a new quarter in, and play another character until you died. I don't think it's any accident that early computer games, adventure games, whether online or not online, but on your computer or in the arcade, mirror D&D in that respect, because they didn't have to make games quarter munchers, except for they're a business also. But like your home computer games, they didn't have to make them to where you could die, but they still did, because there's a gaming element to it. There's a challenge that feeds this spirit of the person playing the game. There's that motivation that it's like another hand of poker. Got to see if I can win. Got to see if I can get back to where I was. Pull that arm on that slot again. It's that human behavior. And story is good, and story-based games have a place. I've enjoyed them, but just there's losing sight of the the game of D&D, I think, has hurt the game as a whole. Let's see. Let me
Who was I
review.
talking to? Who was I talking to? Who were we talking to yesterday? Oh, General Nut. General Nut and I, after Geek's game, we were chatting for a bit, and what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Sorry, Sunday brain. I just completely lost my train of thought.
It's okay. I mean, I totally last minute preempted my original stream idea because it was just a rainy Sunday, and I just and I mean, there were a few little technical issues, but if I really had applied those, I probably would have taken.
I know what I was going to say. It was
Go for
on
it.
the mindset. It was on the mindset of this. I was just distracted by trying to remember who I was talking to about it. But you set the expectations. Like I have played with modern gamers, and I use that term modern because they had never played anything other than 5th Ed, who have melted down at the concept of playing it more hardcore, where you die easily. But at the same time, I played with people who had no experience outside of 5th Ed, no experience outside of the DM makes it safe for you. You will always win, that kind of thing, that extreme level. Not everybody plays that way, obviously, but then you make it clear this is how it's going to be. You're making 3 characters for a reason, and if they're open-minded about it and they say okay, and they set aside their expectation, they come in. It's amazing. There's almost like an epiphany. They look at it and go, "Oh my god, I never knew the game could be this way." It's a whole different experience.
Yeah, and it's funny is I think that a lot of the same people who, so it's funny. So geeks are often cross-platform, right? We're very often tabletop RPGers, and card players and board gamers and video gamers, right? It seems that the concept of death and retry or consequence in the other games that a lot of people play, they just can't translate that as being something fun in a role-playing game. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about there, where there's that epiphany. It's like, if you can just get them to realize that it's no different than, like, you lost a game of Magic. Did you stop playing Magic? Did you get really PO'd? Some people.
No, some do. They flip the table,
clearly, but but most people play a game of Magic, they good game it, and they come back and play another game of Magic with the same deck or a modified deck.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different than saying, man, that dungeon was hard. I'm going to make a new character. I'm going to come back at it. You set up your armies, for a miniature battle, you duke it out, you lose. You don't just sit there and go, this game's stupid, I should be able to win every time. No, you play it out. You try a new tactic. You come at it again. Board games. Okay. I went crazy in Mansions of Madness that time. I bet I can not go crazy that time. A Horror on the House on the Hill. We didn't beat the thing that time, but there are 50 other options that we can do. Let's go back and try it again. And it's so weird to me that folks just, because I know people who are like, I love Magic and I play miniatures games and I'm a video gamer, but god damn it, I hate my character dying in D&D. I'm like, why? How is it that there's that disjoint? I mean, I figure that it's probably because when it comes to role playing, they're very much invested in their character and it in a way that they aren't, say, like in a video game or with their cards. But that, I'm a role player and I lost the mage. It is only I again. Oh well, he'll be back or not. Life happens. All right, folks, we are almost at 11:30. I've said it before. I set these streams for an hour with the expectation that if they're good, they'll go beyond into a second hour. Things are going good. Mage, if you aren't able to come back, no shade. I appreciate you coming on and filling some space and talking the good talk. To the folks who showed up late, Tabletop Tap Room showed up. If you like old school gaming, and you also like to keep abreast of some of the news in the old school gaming world, try out Tabletop Tap Room. That is Gideon Tom. He is also the editor for the new Star Frontiersman, which is the Star Frontiers fan magazine. If you like Star Frontiers, he is the guy for Star Frontiers as far as I'm concerned. He Mages, I think that may have been you because I didn't kick you out. So you just disappeared on me. So it happens. I've done it on Geek stream where I click the wrong button and exit the stream. But yeah, Tabletop Taproom's great. He does a lot of gaming news for old school stuff. Tracks a lot of the interesting, dare I say it, drama going on in some corners. Yeah, let me go ahead and throw a link up here again for you. And if anybody else wants to jump on too. I got about a good half hour left in the stream if we wanted to. But Star Frontiers stuff is Tom's thing. Like he said, he's the editor for Star Frontiersman. He has edited Frontier Explorer, and they did some work on the earlier versions of Star Frontiersman, which is the still ongoing Star Frontiers fanzines with a ton of content for Star Frontiers if you're a Star Frontiers fan. Welcome back, Mage.
Hello.
Yeah, I don't know. You said everything froze and then you disappeared, huh?
Everything froze, but I thought maybe it was my internet, but the rest of my panels or my internet tabs were fine. So
it could have been a
StreamYard's hit glitch. Yeah.
So
what did I miss? What were you saying?
I took a moment to pimp Tabletop Taproom. Tom over there is got a good channel covering old school news, as well as his main thing is Star Frontiers. So if you ever want to know what's going on, what has been going on, and just like he does Friday reviews of some of the fanzines, and also he does occasional reviews of products that can fit into Star Frontiers and stuff. So if you like Star Frontiers or have ever been interested in it, he's the channel to check out. But he also does a lot of coverage of some of the drama in the old school circles. And just genuine news in old school circles. So
I have never played Star Frontiers.
It is a sci-fi game that I would like to run someday. The game
I will sit in and play. It was one of those ones that was on my radar as a kid, but I never got to play it.
I didn't get to play it as much as I'd like, which is why I'd like to play it again. Tom's stuff and the Star Frontiersman has kind of kept me interested in over the years. And I have written a couple articles and contributed to the magazines there. But it's one of those games that I really got into, but never got a chance to play a lot of because other people in my circles weren't really into it. Also, I gravitated towards Star Frontiers instead of Traveler, and a lot of folks who were playing sci-fi games at the time were playing Traveler. And so couldn't be bothered with the game. Evidently, a game that has humanoid amoeboid characters, space monkeys, and space bugs is somehow worse than a game that has lion men named Aslan and dog men named Varger.
And ways to die before you even finish generating your character.
Yeah, so somehow one is different. I mean, the main difference obviously is that Traveler is much more on the crunchy side of sci-fi, whereas Star Frontiers rides that perfect line between a little bit of a Star Wars pew and a grittier science fiction.
Well, allow me to quickly subscribe to Mr. Tabletop here, and I see he's got some AD&D content, which I'll check out later.
Yeah, he's just a good guy.
There you go. You're now up to 533, Mr. Tabletop Taproom.
But Star Frontiers is one of the games. Gamma World is another game I'd like to run, just because it is the original Gonzo sci fantasy game. How can you not have fun with a game where you play like a weird mutant animal? Yeah.
I played TMNT. I loved it.
Yep. So if you ever played After the Bomb,
I did. Yeah, I had the whole series.
Then Gamma World is like that, but with more.
Right.
I would say After the Bomb lends a lot to the same spirit of Gamma World. But like Gamma World is fun. I tend to prefer the first and second edition. Anything after that, Gamma World turned into TSR's testbed product. Basically, every time they had a new system, they would try and plug it into Gamma World and see if it stuck. Like after they created the universal table for for Marvel superheroes, they then started trying to apply it to every game Like
Right.
their third edition of Gamma World gets a universal table. Indiana Jones had a universal table. So that would, and then when fourth edition D&D, well, actually, excuse me, with third edition, they did a Gamma World for using their D20 Modern. And then they also did an alternative version of Gamma World, which is, remember, TSR's in-house, or that was actually WotC, I think, maybe. I can't remember. No, maybe it was still in the TSR days. Either way, it was the in-house sci-fi engine that they came up with. They did a version of Gamma World for that. And then when fourth edition D&D came out, they did a fourth edition D&D system Gamma World. So Gamma World has, by 2010, Gamma World had 7 editions.
Okay.
That tells you how often. Editions 1 and 2 are a true first and second edition. First edition is basically the first attempt. Second edition Gamma World is everything a proper second edition should be, which is a cleanup and better presentation and solidification of the original game. So Star Frontiers, however, got 1 edition and then like half an edition where they screwed up the game when they were trying to tank it. So yeah. Anyways, that was a tangent into TSR sci-fi.
Well, as you say, it's a free form chat.
Yeah. Let's see. Gamma World seems like an excellent game for an open table. If you're familiar with the concept of open table gaming, Gamma World is one of those ones where you could easily create an enclave, in the wasteland, and people just played whatever character. They could be passing through, they could be from the enclave, but just whoever happened to be there played. Yeah, it's definitely a good one. All right, anyways, kind of running out of stuff to talk about.
There's plenty to talk about.
There's always plenty to talk about, but
especially when it comes to geek stuff. I've been pushing John to watch the 13th Warrior. And it's like, come on, John, you got to watch this movie. And then I was like, well, I haven't watched it in a while, so I put it on last night. It's always a bit of a fix, that movie. It's not a great movie by narrative standards, but neither is it a terrible movie. It's that kind of
movie.
Yeah, it just hits the spot once in a while,
It is definitely the sort of movie that gets the adventurous juices flowing. It's actually a good example of the sort of D&D that I tend to gravitate towards too. If you were to take like 13th Warrior and the original Dragon Slayer movie, that feel and vibe, that dark, kind of muddy, imperfect fantasy world. I mean, whether or not 13th Warrior is actually fantasy is up to you, but fantasy doesn't have to be full of magic.
It's funny because as a kid, I saw Dragon Slayer because it was always on, what we had pay TV at the time. It was like the movie channels at the time, which were limited. But and I remember thinking, this movie is really good. This is before I was into D&D, even. I was like 9 or 10, and then I saw it a number of times, and then that was it. It was off, and I couldn't find evidence of that movie for years. I thought, did I imagine that movie? It was sort of like the Star Wars Holiday Special. I saw it once when it aired, and when I was like 5, and then of course George Lucas tried to bury it, and I thought I had dreamt the whole thing. I didn't know it was real. And then a few years ago, of course, now when the internet came out, I was like, oh yeah, Dragon Slayer really did exist. Woohoo! And because even my video stores never had it. So Amazon finally had it for $4. I'm like, I'm gonna grab this before it disappears from my world again.
Yeah, it's on my rotation. I watch that movie about once a year.
Yeah, it holds up. It's one of those ones that
it's still one of the best, if not the best, dragon designs in all of cinema.
Vermithrax pejorative, even if his name is a little silly.
Yeah, it was the her, because remember, babies,
right?
But,
yes.
But yeah, she that dragon was just, and they the way that they handled it, they took the kind of the Jaws angle with it, where you didn't get to see the whole dragon the whole movie, and just the world that was believable as like it could be our world, and maybe was supposed to be a fantasy analog to our world, but wasn't quite. I mean, there's a little bit of magic in there. It's just it's so good. And then there's crappy cheesy movies that are still amazingly good, like Hawk the Slayer, and I watch that like every year too.
Call the Conqueror. We were talking about this on, I think, John's stream. Call the Conqueror is a bad movie by every stretch, but I can't help but love it.
I can't watch it because I don't like Kevin Sorbo.
I mean, that's fair, but I don't mind him so much.
But yeah, I mean, Hawk the Slayer is. Are you familiar with Hawk the Slayer at all?
It's one I haven't seen. I got to look for it.
It is cheesy. It has enough love, however, to where it actually almost succeeded in a Kickstartered sequel, 30, 40 years after the fact, and has recently had a sequel done as a graphic novel. And can you not like a movie where Jack Palance plays the fantasy villain? But it's a good example of an actual D&D movie in a world where we have few.
Especially back then.
You've got a party of and that's why it stood out so much to it. We live actioned that in the woods all the time. You've got a heroic character who has a magic sword that is powered by the last of the elf stones, right? He then has to take on this. There's a quest giver in the form of this mercenary crossbowman who flees his village that gets attacked by the bad guy, and recruits Hawk. And then they go collect their band: an elf archer, a dwarf who I would describe him as a rogue, and a giant. And by giant, it's just a really big man, right? With a warhammer and a breastplate. And then they go do the hero thing, and then there's an NPC sorceress who helps them, and it's bad effects, but it's got all these little vignettes within it, that would make great encounters or NPC interactions. It's directed by a guy who originally did a lot of spaghetti style westerns. So it is a fantasy movie that has the same, or either that or the director was in love with the spaghetti westerns. It's been so long I can't remember exactly. Basically, the whole movie is a fantasy movie shot like a spaghetti western. You've got down to the point where there's a high noon style showdown between two archers. Like who can draw first?
Right.
It's a great movie. That's where it's the movie that the Slaver that I wrote up from that inspired the Slaver that I wrote up that you're running in your OSE campaign.
Okay, Bold.
Yeah, Bold. I can't remember if that's his name in the movie. I don't think they even give him his name, but it's that encounter was inspired by Hawk the Slayer. I mean, Hawk the Slayer is just it's one of those ones I can watch over and over. I go back and watch the original Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, another great one.
I mean, and even that one is a good example of like a small party, adventuring party. You've got,
Conan, Valeria, and Subutai,
and then
Mako, but he's more of an NPC. Though.
Yeah, he's more of an NPC. They go. He's the healer that they go to.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, I mean, and all of them. This is the thing. All of them have takeaways for things that you can use to make your game better. For example, Mako, his character. I can never remember his freaking character's name because it's not Mako because that's the actor's name. He resurrects a character. I mean, Conan is, for all intents and purposes, dead as far as I understand it in that movie, or on death's door. And here's an example of how to put death or high level, resurrection or high level healing into your campaign and not have it be easy. They had to go find some obscure guy and then fight off demons or the spirits of the dead to save him. Yeah. How many D&D parties do you know who have had to not only like go pay somebody gold to cast, raise dead or, resurrection or reincarnate or whatever, but then had to stick around to fight off the dead who might want to claim him.
Yeah, no, that's a great. Again, players might cry foul at that. Why can't I just pay?
Well, and you could pay, but then you're still gonna have to do the thing. I mean, it's just it's a way to make. It's a good example of how to make the things still available, but make them not so easily available that they they become trite, you know. And
Well, that's another great way of using the undead. It's like, all right, fine, but the underworld is sending shadows to claim the soul. You have to fight them off,
oh yeah, and you
or
could run that.
wraiths.
You could run that forever. It's like, okay, your character you did raise dead. I mean, I would say it's a really good call for raise dead. Raise dead's a relatively easy, accessible spell, right?
Mhm.
And you can use it within a short period of time as opposed to resurrection, right? Say raise dead, a good counter to it would be like just as a DM, 5% cumulative chance behind the screen that they attract the attention of creatures from the negative material plane.
Or more practically, if you're not of the faith, like generally speaking, clerics won't raise outside of their faith. That could be the reason. If you're not of the faith and you get yourself raised, you attract these creatures that will come for you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a Mr. Welch as a guy that I discovered through Gen X GM's channel. I've been watching his stuff on Mystara. Very well spoken, well put together treatment of Mystara, actually, which is like his favorite world. But he did an episode on the concept of the non-evil necromancer. I know John is now wringing his fist at the sky, but and how like various editions of D&D have presented options for there to be non-evil undead or non-evil necromancers, and you're talking about like, are you of the faith and stuff too? I mean, does a character who's raised from the dead count as potentially undead, and could a cleric of an alternate faith use turning on him?
Yeah. I mean, that's something to explore. I would say baseline, no, that's not the intent. Obviously,
Yeah,
Raised Dead has infused you with life again.
I always thought that Raised Dead basically brought you back to your body.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in that sense of the kind of that old world sense that the spirit of the dead kind of lingers around the body for X amount of time and can be put back into the body and then later on down the road, if it's too long, you've actually passed on, then you'd have to do a resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're not. There's not. I guess if somebody can't cast animate dead on you, obviously, and to keep the body walking along till they could get you to town,
Then
you're
you're undead,
subject to
yes.
turn. Yeah.
Or disintegration if the cleric is high enough. Yeah, it's like, wait, I was going to raise him.
So
sorry.
On the topic of good undead, I had created a society for a game, or good necromancers, society for a game where the entire society had a very different outlook on death and the undead. I remember I created it back when I was younger, and I kind of took a note from Isle of Dread. If you remember in Isle of Dread, or if you're familiar with Isle of Dread, you run into those natives in there who use their dead ancestors, cooperate with their dead ancestors to conduct civic works. Like all the big walls and stuff and public works they've built have been built by the hands of their animated dead. And so I took that and built this whole like grand society out of it, where you have a kingdom or an empire where they have a strong belief that your service to your living family continues in death, and so they take care of their dead very well. Like anybody who had a career as a living person is buried with tools and maintained, if they can, with the tools of their trade, whether that's fighting or construction or whatever. And like if in times of war, they will call upon their ancestors who form the vanguard of their military to try and prevent their living relatives from having to bear the brunt of war.
Right.
But also if disaster strikes, then you've got a whole workforce of undead who can do there's a landslide that fell on that village. Well, we'll summon up the dead and have them clear the landslide because it's easier, and then like once your body was totally wrecked and you couldn't be raised anymore, then you either went off and enjoyed your afterlife, but there was never the stigma that it was evil. That was just expected. Like you were asking your relatives to come back and help you, even to the point where certain influential people or people with enough money, even after their bodies were wrecked, might have like stipulations that paid for an artificial body to be built for their spirit to inhabit. So you'd have these golems hanging around. You know? But it was a whole society built around the idea that necromancy wasn't evil. You know, it was just, you know, and I remember trying to write up a subclass for 5th edition for a good necromancer where you're basically a dead whisperer. You weren't dragging people out of death to work to serve you. You were calling upon the heroes of the past to fight on your behalf or to help you out. You know, you're kind of like you said, a dead whisperer. So you know, you're working with the dead as opposed to against them, or dragging them and forcing them to work for you. Let's see.
Taproom's talking about Walking Dead season 2. Yeah, the Herschel kept corralling the undead into the barn because he believed they would get better. They were just sick, and that they would get better.
Yeah. Well, he was also a very pious man too. So it was very. I mean, there's always that weird zombies put into the face of faith. Really, is an interesting argument because, like, are they dead? Or are they still in there? Where's the spirit now? You know? But I think that obviously, like, even in D&D, like, a lot of the healing spells are based in necromancy, at least in some editions. You know, like, if they classify, like, I think in 5th edition at least, like the healing spells are still technically classed as necromantic spells. So is necromancy evil necessarily? But no, that was an idea I had for that. There's actually an evil version of that in the expanded Dragonlance campaign setting in that whole box set they did for the other continent, and where there is a nation that forces its dead to fight for it. They have a whole legion of undead that they raise up.
But that's all great fodder for exploration in the game, because you know the typical society, at least where characters will start, that sort of thing. Undead is an abomination. Undead is bad. And even if let's say you've got that society where no, it's just a tool. It's just a tool, and our culture expects the dead will continue to serve the family. As you said, that's a great idea. But then you get, somebody brings in a druid for whom the undead is not natural. That is an abomination, and that creates in-game conflict that you can have fun with.
Oh yeah. It's like, all right, I'm not cool with this. I fully expect that that's what they were going for in the Isle of Dread when they wrote that. You run into this sort of Mesoamerican island kind of culture. They're kind of the Ullman of old D&D, or sort of that typical old school fantasy of like splat culture, kind of blankety culture. But you meet them and there are zombies walking around their villages. Mm-hmm. But they're doing the work, so the people don't have to do the work. And in that sense, it really, I fully expect that when they that was written and into that adventure. So when these adventurers from a more typical fantasy land, because of course this is XX1, which is going to be your module that's supposed to pick up where the B and the BX leaves off, right? So you assume that they got like 3 levels under them of typical fantasy, where they've been fighting skeletons and zombies in the Caves of Chaos, right? Or the Lost City or whatever. And they get there and there's these undead around these friendly villagers, and it's put there to kind of blow the players' minds, right? Like, because face it, back then you'd be like, wow, this is really cool. I mean, think of how nuanced that must have seemed back in the early 80s when it came out. Like, this is some really crazy new shit. But
there's a reason skeletons and zombies are neutral, not evil, as with every other undead.
Yeah,
they're just automatons. They're not. There's no malicious spirit still lingering. They're simply empty shells that have been animated.
I know in one of the games in my Vagabond Seas campaign I was running for 5th edition, my nautical campaign, on one of the islands they went to, they kept stumbling on these small little shrines in the jungle that had little mummified bodies in them. Like kind of, the typical, think about like how you always see like the Andean mountain mummies, how they're always kind of curled up, right? And and these mummies were were smoke treated because they're in a jungle. Obviously, you have to do something to make them kind of inert, but they're all kind of huddled up in these little stone shrines along, that were just peppered through the jungle as they walked. And they realized that after a while that these little shrines were in a perimeter. And then they realized that these shrines were in a perimeter around this old temple they found. And it turns out that once they disturbed the treasure in the temple, every one of those little mummies in those shrines activated. Because they were the guardians of the people. They were there to protect their city and it was fun. You can use undead in interesting ways. I mean, even Larry Elmore wrote into Forgotten Realms those weird Baelnorns, the kind of elven lich variant that chose sort of a life of eternal undeath to guard the ruins of Myth Drannor. But that's kind of cool. So yeah, you don't have to stick to what it said in the book.
No, I absolutely don't.
Revenants, I think, are neutral, maybe neutral evil, because they. Let me find out.
I can't remember. I
think Revenants are in Fiend Folio.
Yeah, they're in the Fiend Folio.
Here's Revenant. Yeah, true neutral. Yeah, because in a lot of ways they're. I almost expected them to be neutral evil, because they're motivated by just single-minded
revenge,
which could be seen as evil, but
you could argue too, a revenant comes back to fix an injustice. Right?
That is true. So they could also technically, injustice is kind of morally neutral because it's point of view. So you could argue that I guess true neutral is probably the best place for them. Let's just talk about undead. On the topic of undead, this book had so many good undead in it. You've got
so many good things in it. Period.
Yeah. You've got the Hecuba in here, which is sort of a low level
guy.
The Hecuba is a low level, basically cleric lich.
Right.
We got
it's the pilgrim. The Hecuba is the pilgrim one, right?
Yeah, it's the priestly clericy magic. Yeah, I don't know. It's funny as obscure as this book seems to have been back in the day. Like, I remember people just absolutely hating this book in AD&D. Even it was weird and those monsters didn't fit or whatever. Probably because they're all mostly so original, right?
So much hate goes around for a lot of old D&D books.
But where I was going with that is so many of the monsters from that book are now considered staples of D&D now. Geeks naming off a few of them, like the Penangolin. It really hasn't become a staple, but like Sons of Cuse,
Death Knights are big.
Sons of Cuse have been around for almost every edition. I'm probably mispronouncing it. Caius. I used to say Caius, and then I heard it as Cuse, and now it stuck. Death Knight, definitely, and elevated all the way up to a named character with Lord Soth. To the point where Lord Soth has sort of eclipsed the original Death Knight. But other things that are in there that have become sort of standards would be the Darklings, the Darkstalker, and those are in there. Those have persisted. Githyanki and Githzerai. Thanks to Planescape, I think Planescape kind of solidified those into there. But Grell are around still.
Was the Grick also from that one?
No, Grick is Monster Manual 2.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, Grick is Monster Manual 2, and I think may have originally appeared in Sojkanth. I can't remember. Aarakocra. There's a good one that's around to the point of being ad nauseum. But even obscure things like the Almir Raj is still around. A little unicorn bunny.
Unicorn bunnies.
The apparitions in here. I think the one thing that this book did is it filled in a lot of the mid to low level undead as well, because apparitions are like an 8 hit die undead. But let's see, we got. Now it's turned into the flip through the female bullywugs. Let's just say that bullywugs are around and have been prominent. Bullywugs are one of the few things from this book that made it into the D&D cartoon. Flail Snail and Flump, Skeleton Warrior. Yeah, those are all good ones as well. Caryatid Columns. Those are around a lot.
Look up Tirafeg for a really weird one.
Tirafig. I love the one. Then there's the ones that haven't aged well because of their names, like the Tween. It was like because Tween took on a new meaning in pop culture.
Well, you can play that as a great trick monster. It's like you come face to face with a group of tweens.
Oh, the Tirafig is just
annoying
one
teenagers.
Of those really bizarre ones. That's like that is one of those ones that almost has to come from actual myth because it's so bizarre. It's so funny how often like actual mythological monsters can sometimes be more strange than the ones we create for our games. Let's see. Spurfniblin, there's another one. Slads. I mean,
as opposed to salads. Carnivorous salads.
Even the Tabaxi are in here. You know, they've become kind of staples. Shadow Demons. I mean, face it, Shadow Demon is another one. You know, it occurs to me now the creators of the D&D cartoon liked this book. Because Bullywugs, Shadow Demons, Skeleton Warriors, and I mean, all of those are from this book and were in the D&D cartoon. Remember the episode with Decion, the Skeleton Warrior?
The people who made Osric published a nice little book called Monsters of Myth, which is basically another Fiend Folio Monster Manual style book with a lot of interesting new ideas.
Yeah, there was one of my favorite companies that I used to buy from a lot in the old days was Roll Aids, and they did a lot of cool unauthorized D&D stuff. Like it started, they would do race specific books like elves, dwarves, and they would present some really cool ideas. But they also did a series of books that were magic items of myth and legend, and so it was like everything from like here's the Aegis shield, or you know the winged sandals, or Thor's hammer. But they would even do like Paul Bunyan's axe, you know, like, and it was just like anything that they could dredge from myth and folklore, and they would give D&D stats for it. I still have that around here somewhere, I think. But I unfortunately I don't have my old Elves book. The cool thing is that Roll Aids at some point started teaming up with Grenadier, and so remember how Grenadier would have their range of dragons, their box set of dragons, or their box sets of giant miniatures. Grenadier with Roll Aids would then publish a book to go along with that would use the box art as the art plates for each type of dragon or giant. And it was cool because you know the dragon one had your typical red, blue, green, platinum, but then also they would do like the sea dragon. One of the weirdest giants though that they had in the giant book, it was the dwarven giant. It was a giant dwarf.
Right. Well, that's fire giants. They're basically giant dwarves.
Well, they had fire giants in there. The dwarf giant looked literally like somebody like grew a dwarf. That's an odd idea. They also had a chaos giant in there, which is interesting. It's a really great miniature too, because he was kind of like stomping around with a big old sword and a devil tail and horns and stuff.
Geek is tapping out, but you're wrapping up in a few minutes anyway.
Yeah, I'm actually at that time. All right, the stream must come to an end at some point. I got to go make breakfast and probably try and spend some time with my wife.
I got to get back to my editing. I want to get this video out today. It's
cool.
The new reveal. I've passed the 900 mark. I'm now on the countdown to 1,000.
Nice.
907 as of right now. So I'm putting out the video to reveal the next giveaway prize for when I cross that 1,000 mark.
Nice.
So
well, everybody who came out today, thank you. Let's push mages up to the 1,000 mark. If you know somebody who would like to watch a show that is hosted by a puppet or puppets and has some really good stuff to say, both about the playing of games as well as reviewing modules, Mage's Musings is the place to go. His shorts are just on fire lately, not his pants, but his actual short videos. Just really good nuggets of AD&D wisdom. So I think it's all been AD&D so far, your shorts, hasn't it?
So far, yeah. But I am planning to put some OSE stuff in there as well. I've now got a sort of concrete delineation, whereas the wizard will talk OSE stuff and the Demi-Lich will be the AD&D guy.
That's cool.
So-
Yeah, I mean, just always good stuff. I always joke around, like every time I watch one of your shorts, I realize how little I knew about AD&D. But the Old Geek, John's channel, that's kind of the hub for a lot of us. We sort of all met through the Old Geek's channel. We're always
Geek,
there.
yeah.
We're on Wednesdays. His channel is great. He does a lot of videos on, he does video games. He plays old computer games, does reviews of modules, both D&D and Call of Cthulhu. Some talk about other games like Paranoia and stuff. A lot of reviews and stuff on there as well. So good channel all in all. Tabletop Tap Room was here, of course. He has his channel. I mentioned Mechhead Studios has a channel. He's kind of like me,
right?
Mechhead Studios. He's kind of a general miniatures guy, crafter. He does do RPGs, but most of his video stuff tends to be about stuff he's doing in his shop, in his garage. So good stuff there. But on that note, I think that's all the people who showed up who have channels. And with that, I will bid you all a happy Sunday. Thanks for joining me on this random ramble. Saxius, I know you were here earlier, but I know you're off doing dinner. Have a good night and a good day wherever you may be, and get out and game.
Have a good day, everyone.
Later, folks.